There is a night at the end of winter that the deer in your area have been waiting for. Not the first warm day, not the first green shoot, not the calendar date that humans have assigned to the season's end. Something older than any of those things. Something written in the quality of the air and the angle of the light and the particular warmth that comes up from the ground on the night when winter finally, irrevocably, begins to release its hold. The deer feel it before any instrument can measure it, before your weather app knows it is coming, before the trees have shown a single bud. And on that night, the last real night of winter, the night the cold finally begins its long retreat, the deer do something that almost no one who has ever watched them has seen. Something that has no name in any language because no human has ever been told to look for it. Something that researchers are only beginning to document after years of wondering why the deer in late winter behave so differently from the deer they have studied in any other season. Tonight you are going to see it for the first time. Welcome back to Hidden Backyard Wildlife, the channel where we sit with the small wild lives that share our yards and try to understand what they understand about the world. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe before this video is over, because what you are about to learn is going to permanently change the way you look at the deer at your tree line on the last cold evening before the world begins to warm. Today we are walking through 8 things deer do on the last night of winter. What those behaviors tell us about how they sense the world and how they have survived it. And why the animals you have been watching from your back window through the long cold months are doing something on this particular night that you have been standing too far away from to see. Stay with me from beginning to end because behavior number 6 is the one that no researcher expected to find and the one that changes everything about how we think about what winter means to deer. And the final one, number 8, is the one I think will stay with you the longest, especially the next time you stand at your window on a late winter evening and feel, without being able to explain it, that something is different about tonight. Every night of winter, the deer at your tree line have been reading the darkness with a specific quality of attention, the hypervigilant, energy-conserving, survival-oriented attention of animals who are cold, depleted, and operating in the most dangerous season of their year. On the last night of winter, they read it differently. The air changes before the season changes. The moisture content shifts, the temperature gradient between the ground and the sky, the thermal exchange that deer can detect through their nose and their skin, alters in a way that is too subtle for human instruments and too significant for deer bodies to miss. The particular quality of cold that has characterized every night for months begins to carry within it, for the first time, the faint chemical signature of the earth beginning to wake beneath the frost. Researchers studying seasonal behavioral transitions in white-tailed deer have documented that deer demonstrate measurable changes in olfactory behavior and movement patterns in the 24 to 48 hours preceding significant seasonal transitions, specifically the late winter to early spring transition, suggesting they are detecting environmental signals that precede any visible change in the landscape. She is reading the night differently because the night is different. The cold is still there, the frost is still on the ground, the trees are still bare, but something in the chemical language of the air is saying something it has not said since last autumn, and she has been waiting for it. Through every hard night of winter, she has been waiting for this particular message in this particular air. She knows before you do, she always has, she always will. Winter is, for deer, a managed fast. Not a complete one, they continue to forage throughout the coldest months, but a period of severe caloric restriction in which the body draws on fat reserves accumulated in autumn to survive the gap between what the frozen landscape provides and what survival requires. By the last night of winter, that fast has been long. The fat reserves that were built in October are significantly depleted. The body is running on what it has left. The spring and the food abundance it brings are not yet here, but they are close enough that the body has begun preparing for the transition. And on the last night of winter, the deer eat differently. Researchers studying nutritional ecology in white-tailed deer have found that deer show a measurable increase in foraging activity and food intake in the late winter period that precedes spring greenup, an anticipatory shift in feeding behavior that occurs before new growth is available, suggesting the deer's body is already preparing for the nutritional abundance of spring before spring has arrived. She forages on the last night of winter with an urgency that is different from winter's careful, rationed eating. The body knows something is changing. The metabolism is beginning to shift. The long discipline of winter conservation is beginning to give way to the biological imperative of recovery and renewal. She eats in the cold on the last cold night with something that functions like the particular hunger of someone who has been patient for a very long time and can finally see the meal that is coming. Not yet arrived, but close enough to smell. close enough to begin eating toward. Through the coldest months, the deer in your area have been compressing their range. Not because the territory has changed, it hasn't, but because survival in winter requires energy conservation, and moving through cold landscapes costs energy that cannot be easily replaced. The winter range of a deer is smaller than her other season range for exactly this reason. She goes where she needs to go and no further. On the last night of winter, she moves further. Researchers studying seasonal home range variation in white-tailed deer have documented a phenomenon sometimes called range expansion behavior in the late winter period. A gradual but measurable increase in the distances deer travel in the days and nights immediately preceding the spring greenup, before new food is available, and before temperature increases would explain the behavioral shift. She is moving toward the places she knows will be good first, the south-facing slopes that warm earliest, the stream banks where the mud thaws before the fields, the hedgerows and field edges that catch the first growth. She is not going to them randomly. She is going to the specific locations where she has learned through previous springs that the first good things appear. And she goes there on the last night of winter to be in position when the world opens up. You might see her further from your yard tonight than you have seen her since autumn. She is not wandering, she is navigating, she knows where she is going, she has been there before. She is simply going back to the places that are about to become worth going back to. Winter is a social contraction as well as a physical one. The social groups of deer, which are elaborate and specific in their composition during autumn and spring, simplify under winter's pressure. Animals that range together in better seasons sometimes separate when range compression and food scarcity make the efficiency of smaller groups more viable for survival. On the last night of winter, the deer begin to find each other again. Researchers studying deer social dynamics across seasons have documented that the late winter period is characterized by increased interindividual association behavior. Deer who have been ranging separately or in reduced groups beginning to move toward each other, to increase proximity, to re-establish the social bonds that will underpin the more complex group structures of spring. She has been alone or nearly alone for months. The particular deer she normally ranges with have been nearby but not close, surviving the winter in proximity but not in the daily social intimacy of the warmer seasons. And on the last night of winter she begins moving toward them. Not urgently, not with the driven quality of the breeding season's social imperatives. Quietly. The way you might move toward the people you have been missing after a long, hard winter, not running, not calling out, just moving in the right direction, closing the distance that the cold season opened. If you watch the deer at your tree line on the last night of winter, you may notice them closer together than they have been in months. Not huddled, that is the cold behavior. This is different. This is the beginning of choosing to be near each other again. This is the one that requires the most careful attention to see, because it is not visible in dramatic behavior but in the particular quality of where the deer go and why. On the last night of winter, the deer move toward memory. Specifically toward the locations associated with last spring's abundance, the place where the first wild onions came up in April, the meadow edge where the clover grew thick in May, the stream bank where the watercress appeared in the first thaw. These locations are held in the deer's spatial memory with the particular vividness of places associated with survival, places where good things happened, where the fast ended, where the body was finally, after the long winter, given what it needed. Researchers studying episodic-like memory in white-tailed deer have found evidence that deer use spatial memory of previous seasonal food sources to direct pre-emergence movement, moving toward the locations of past spring abundance before any current season cues would guide them there. She is going to last April, not literally, but in the navigational sense, she is moving toward the coordinates of last spring's first good things because her body has learned that those coordinates are where the good things come from, and the signal she is receiving tonight tells her that the time for good things is approaching. She is living in the present with the accumulated memory of every previous spring she has survived. And on the last night of winter, that memory is pulling her in a specific direction, toward specific places, for reasons that go back further than this particular body, back through generations of deer who learned that this is the direction to go when the air begins to smell like this. This is the one researchers did not expect, and it is the one that changes everything about how we think about what winter means to a deer. On the last night of winter, or the night they perceive as the last night, the night the air changes, researchers studying deer behavior have documented an unusual pattern. Deer that have spent the winter moving carefully through cover, avoiding open ground, minimizing exposure and energy expenditure will sometimes stop. in the middle of a field, in open ground, at night, and simply stand there. Not frozen in alarm, not feeding, not traveling, standing, with a quality of stillness that is different from the alert stillness of threat detection and different from the resting stillness of animals conserving energy. A voluntary, chosen, aware stillness in the open under the late winter sky for minutes at a time. Researchers have struggled to classify this behavior. It does not fit neatly into the established behavioral categories. It is not foraging, not predator avoidance, not social behavior, not resting. It looks to the observers who have documented it like something that has no name in the scientific literature but that would in another context be described as simply being present, being in the world, taking in the night. She has spent months in cover, months of careful energy management, of minimizing exposure, of compressing her life into the smallest survivable shape. And on the night the air tells her that the compression can begin to end, she walks into the open. She stands in it. She breathes the cold air that is beginning, just barely, to carry the first message of the season beyond this one. She is not resting, she is not hiding, she is not doing any of the things deer are supposed to be doing. She is standing in a field on the last night of winter and receiving the news that it is almost over. This one requires the most patience to notice, because it is expressed in an absence rather than a presence, in something that does not happen on the last night of winter that has been happening throughout the cold season. Deer are not silent animals. They communicate through vocalizations, through the snort-wheeze of alarm, through the social bleats of group cohesion, through the contact calls of does and fawns, and through a winter-specific pattern of low, persistent social vocalizations that researchers have associated with the stress and social tension of resource scarcity in the cold months. On the last night of winter, these stress vocalizations diminish. Researchers studying acoustic behavior in white-tailed deer across seasons have documented that deer vocalization patterns show measurable changes in the late winter transition period, specifically a reduction in the low-frequency stress vocalizations associated with resource competition and cold season social tension, in the 24 to 48 hours before the behavioral and environmental markers of spring emergence. The deer at your treeline have been, throughout the winter, making sounds you have probably never heard from a distance. Low, frequent, the particular acoustic texture of animals under chronic resource pressure. And on the last night of winter, those sounds quiet. Not to silence, but to a different quality of quiet. The quiet that comes after a long, difficult thing has nearly ended. The quiet of animals who have been braced against something for months and are beginning, very slowly, to release the brace. The first breath out after a very long-held breath. If you have ever sat near a treeline on a late winter night and noticed that the woods seemed, somehow, less tense than they have been, that was probably it. The winter quiet beginning to shade toward a different kind of quiet. The stressed quiet becoming the relieved quiet, one of the finest distinctions in the acoustic life of the natural world. I have saved this one for last, because it is the one I think will stay with you the longest. On the last night of winter, after the reading and the eating and the moving and the reconnecting and the remembering and the standing in the open and the quieting, the deer do what they have done every night of winter, every night of every season, every night of their entire lives. They wait for the light. Not passively, not simply because the night must end and the day must come, but with the particular quality of waiting that belongs to the last night of a long, hard season, the waiting that knows the light is coming and holds that knowledge in the body like a warmth that has not yet arrived but is already felt. Researchers studying photoperiod sensitivity in white-tailed deer have found that deer are extraordinarily sensitive to changes in day length, that the gradual lengthening of days through late winter is one of the primary biological signals that triggers the cascade of physiological and behavioral changes associated with the transition to spring. The deer's body is already responding to the longer days before the light has produced any visible change in the landscape. She has been measuring the light all winter. She knows it is changing. And on the last night, on the night the air says what it says and the body responds as it responds, she waits for the light with everything she has. The depleted body, the long memory, the companions she has been moving back toward, the places she knows will be good again when it arrives. She stands at the treeline in the last dark of the last cold night, and she waits. She has been waiting for this light since October. Through every storm, every frozen morning, every day when the food was barely enough and the cold was more than enough. She has been waiting for this specific light, the light of the morning after the last night of winter, with the patience of an animal who has no choice but to wait and no way of surviving except by waiting well. And the light comes. It always comes. It comes the way it has come every spring of her life and every spring of every deer's life before her, slowly from the east, touching the tops of the bare trees before it reaches the ground, warming the frost before it melts it, making the world visible before it makes it warm. She watches it arrive. The first light of the first morning of the world past winter, her body already knowing what it means, already beginning the long, slow process of the season's renewal, the coat that will thin, the range that will expand, the food that will come, the fawns that will arrive in May, the full, complicated life of a deer in a warm world. It is all in the light she watches arrive. And she watches it the way anyone watches the end of a long, hard thing, with relief so deep it has no words, and a kind of gratitude that is not felt consciously but that lives in the whole body, in the way the body releases what it has been holding, in the way the shoulders drop that have been raised all winter, in the first full breath of a morning that smells, finally, like something other than cold. The light comes, winter ends, she is still here. That is not a story about deer on the last night of winter. That is a story about endurance, about the particular kind of strength it takes to survive a long, cold thing by waiting, by being patient, by trusting that the light will come even when the light has been gone for a very long time. She survived the winter, she is at the tree line, she is watching the light arrive. And she is still here, which is everything. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the comments below. Have you ever stood at your window on a late winter evening, the cold still there, the bare trees still bare, and felt something shift in the quality of the night that you could not name? A sense that something was different, that the season was changing before there was any visible evidence of the change? Tell me about it. What did it feel like? What were the deer doing when you looked? The stories this hidden backyard wildlife community shares are some of the most extraordinary I read every week, and every single one of them matters. If anything in this video changed the way you will look at the deer at your tree line on the last cold evening of this year's winter, share it with someone who would understand. Sometimes the right perspective at the right moment changes what we notice for the rest of our lives. Thank you for being here at Hidden Backyard Wildlife. This winter, on the night the air changes, look out the window. The deer are already out there in the dark, reading something in the cold that you will feel only after they have already known it. They are waiting for the light. They are always waiting for the light. I will see you in the next one.